What is up? How's it going, Odd Squad? Welcome to the Die Hard MMA podcast. I'm your host, as always, the man behind the camera, Clint. How's everybody doing this Monday evening? Coming off a nice little win on Saturday, UFC Vegas 6, and here we are, our usual hangout. What's up, everybody? How we doing? We've got Andrew Mills, Brandon Phillip, MMA champ commentary. We've got Gui Avalos, Derek Anthony, Brandon Rahil. We've got my boy Boston Nick, MMA in the house. What is up, everybody? Gabe Killian, James Me, George S, Bob Lee Swagga, Danny Seho, Jeremy Mullins. How is everybody doing? Welcome to the show this evening. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me tonight. I couldn't be more excited. I am super stoked. We got to recap last week's event real quick. We'll run through the previous bets that we had, and not only that, I've got a special guest for you guys this evening, so we are going to get this party started. How's everybody doing? Let me just go ahead and switch my little inspirational quote banner out there. I like to do that for everybody, put you all in a good mood to get the ball rolling here. So at the bottom here, you're going to see my little ticker with last week's results. We can go ahead and recap last week's event. We're going to do it quick because we want to pick the brain of our special guest this evening. Let me go ahead and introduce the one, the only Matthew Holt. Matt, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast and joining us today. How you doing?
Great, Clint. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I couldn't be happier to have you on. It's a absolute pleasure. I've watched you do your breakdowns with my buddy Drew time and time again, and it's always awesome to hear your insights. So super excited to have you on the show today, and thanks for giving us some time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Look, what a card we're coming off of. I think the one thing we learned during COVID is that 25-foot octagon is producing some really fun fights over there at the Las Vegas Apex.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. And it's funny because in every single interview that Dana White does, he's like, it doesn't matter. People fight. It's no big... No, it matters. It definitely matters. These people have nowhere to run, and it's forcing the action for sure. Did you have action on last week's card? Do you want to run through the previous event and kind of go over what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I had a kind of an up and down card. I had Andrew Sanchez, which worked out really well. I had Justin James, which almost looked like another underdog winner early, as he gets a knockdown in the first round. Looked like he might be able to get a finish, and then completely gasses himself and gets chopped up the rest of that fight. And then I had Chris Weidman under 2.5 rounds, which didn't work out very well at all. Again, the apex, the idea that I thought either Akhmadov would test that chin early, or Weidman would catch him in something early, and they ended up both gassing, and it just turned into an ugly, very sloppy affair. And then I had under in the main, which got there as well. So it's kind of up and down during that card. And I had Beneil Dariush, like you did, at minus 160, and I couldn't believe after missing weight. Normally, there's a very negative reaction in the betting markets to weight misses. Yet in this case, you could have laid minus 170-ish around the time they did the weigh-ins. Yet by the time they stepped in the octagon, minus 220 to minus 240 on Beneil Dariush.
It was really super odd, and I mean, I don't know if maybe other people were seeing kind of things the way that I was, because I do a post-weigh-in video every single Friday, and I talk about, where people look strong on the scales and where they look weak. We've actually been picking up a whole lot of extra units based on those reads, and I didn't think that Dariush looked bad. I mean, I know he missed weight, but it was almost like one of those intentional misses where he's starting to feel bad, things are starting to go a little downhill, and he just went, screw it, I'll just pay the fine, and he didn't look like he was sucked out or drained or anything, so I feel like that extra couple of pounds might have even helped him in this one.
He looked amazing. That might have been the best performance I've ever seen, and we've seen him have some big first rounds before against like Evan Dunham and stuff, and now recently he's on a finishing streak, and he looks great.
He's extremely well-rounded, and his striking is coming along leaps and bounds. I kind of thought he would do it by submission, but I'm a little bummed I didn't take him just inside the distance. Obviously, we had the right side laying minus 160 on him, but yeah, missed out on some value there for sure. I want to run over my bets real quick because honestly, part of the reason why I was super excited to have you on the show is I feel like you and I think a whole lot alike. So we had a couple of sprinkles on Youssef Zalal. I had him to win by submission in rounds 2 or 3. And he had his opponent's back for basically those entire 2 rounds. We had, I want to say, plus 15 and plus 1500 and plus 2200 for a quarter unit on each of those stabs. And I thought we were going to start the night off with a banger. I thought that was coming through for us, but I mean, plenty of value there in my opinion, since he was going for the choke basically the entire time. But like you said, we cashed on Sanchez. I felt like that was a super sharp play. I couldn't understand why he was such a big dog in this spot, and I know a bunch of people that were just sold down the river on Wellington Turman, and I just didn't see it. I felt like he was the perfect opponent to let Sanchez do what he does best. I mean, he's a limited fighter, but he's going to beat certain people in that paper, rock, scissors type of matchup. And I felt like this was the spot, So glad we cashed on that one. Unfortunately, I made a mistake on playing Holland by sub at plus 200. He just got upgraded to black belt. I knew he was going to finish the fight, and getting 2-1 on the submission prop, I thought he might want to kind of show off those new chops to everybody, but I guess he just felt like dominating and playing around in there. He ends up getting the knockout, so again, felt like I should have taken the inside the distance, but I went for that plus 200, so that one was my bad. And I actually had a lean towards Tim Means, ended up playing the under 2.5 on that one, kind of like your Wyman side, and ate a little crow on that one. I thought it was going to be over. Tim Means is kind of missing a beat, I feel like. He had his opponent hurt really badly, I want to say, in the second round, and usually Tim Means dives on that. We've seen him jump on people and submit them and TKO them, and this time he seemed kind of content to just sit back and let things play out, which kind of surprised me. I thought he was going to go for the finish, and we don't cash there, so that was a bit unfortunate, but then we did load up on Dariush, and I actually had a two-time best bet on Chris Wyman, and I also had Chris Wyman to win in the third round at 12-1 for a half unit, so I was right there with you on round 3 being the way that this thing went down, and he got the mount, he had the back, I mean, it was all there, it could have happened for sure.
So one of the things to consider in both those fights, the Weidman fight and the Tim Means fight, is that veteran experience when you're looking at betting over-unders. In both cases, both guys cruised in those last third rounds. They played it safe. Weidman got on top, and he never really looked for a finish. He kind of put an arm triangle, head and triangle choke in there. But most part, he just wanted to maintain mount, make sure he maintained position, and won the fight. And the same thing with Tim Means. He constantly pushed the action against the fence, held the clinch, didn't allow Staropoli to get off any crazy strikes in the third round. And it's something to consider, I think, when you look to play veteran fighters like that to win in the third round, is a lot of time, if it's closer, they're ahead, they're going to do those veteran moves just to get the win and not necessarily to score that big knockout or sub in the late in the fight.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think the other side of that as well is the fact that these guys really needed that win. Both Tim and Chris are, they're on the chopping block if they don't get a win or two in their record here. So I think that was probably something I should have considered more. You're absolutely right, but hindsight is 20/20 in these kind of spots. I don't mind the sprinkle at those crazy lines. So, everybody's super excited in the chat. Thanks again for jumping in and joining us. I want to let everybody know, smash the like button. Make sure you give us a retweet on Twitter. Let everybody know that Matt's hanging out with us this evening to break down UFC 252. And I apologize, the chat is kind of hard to keep up with today. We've got over 200 live viewers already, so let's rock this thing, Matt. I want to go ahead and get started here. We've got TJ Brown taking on Danny Chavez, and I think I'll kick it over to you. How do you feel on this first fight of the evening here?
Yeah, for a big pay-per-view card, I was surprised that, and I don't want to call these guys not quality, but the bottom of this card felt like they were just trying to find guys to throw this thing together. The one thing about TJ Brown I think we do know is that he has wrestling chops, right? And he's shown that in the past. And I wonder what's up with Danny Chavez. So when I go back and I look at Danny Chavez, this is a guy that was kind of a grinder forever. And now all of a sudden he has 3 straight knockout wins, the only 3 knockout wins of his career in his past 3 fights. So did he figure something out, or is it the level of competition? I know TJ Brown lost to Jordan Griffin, but I think Jordan Griffin's a legit UFC guy at least. I tend to favor Brown here. I think there's 2 things we know with the smaller octagons in the Apex. It favors power punchers and it favors elite grapplers. If you can get it to the ground, again, it's harder for people to avoid the takedowns in the smaller octagon. I got to lean toward TJ Brown in this one.
I'm right there with you, and I really wanted to find an excuse to bet on Danny Chavez. Like you said, his
Sure.
last three fights, he's really been figuring out. It seems like he's kind of coming into his own, and I saw what he's done and was super excited. He's got a good boxing base, good head movement, fast hands, fast, heavy leg kicks. But the issue is he's really struggled with the takedowns his entire career, and that's all TJ does. He's a submission guy, he's a wrestler, and if you can take him down, put him on his back, then he kind of has a little bit of trouble. But if he's the one pushing the grappling, he is all about that submission offense. So I'm kind of here with you, and it's a bit unfortunate because it looks like he's a minus 170 favorite. The comeback on Danny Chavez is plus 150. A little bit of money coming in on him. He was plus 160 yesterday when I took a look at this fight. And there's no way I'm trusting TJ Brown at minus 170. What about you?
No, I don't. I definitely don't want to lay the minus 170, and I don't like betting overs in the small cage. But my thought is, if you like TJ Brown, then you probably think this is going to be a heavy grappling-based attack, which I assume that it will be, like most TJ Brown fights. Thus, basically, the 2.5 rounds prop, the over/under is like a pick 'em. I think overs minus 115. I saw right before I hopped on. So if you like TJ Brown, there's probably a pretty good chance this one goes the distance. And maybe betting the over is the way to go. Or, let's face it, Chavez defense, submission defense isn't the best, but he can crack. His path to victory is knockout. I don't know. Maybe I would go TJ Brown inside the distance, hoping that Chavez tires and that you get that sub late. But I think if I was forced to play here, I'd go over 2.5.
Okay, I like it. I'll have to consider that one a little bit. I actually do another show a little later on in the week we call Total Madness, where I go over the overs and unders for the entire card from that perspective. And I kind of saved my kind of saved my research for that show a little bit later. If I have like a strong opinion, I'll definitely give it out, but I kind of revisit the card after doing the podcast to look for that kind of stuff. I kind of like how you're looking there. The over right now looks like it's juiced minus 130 to the over 2.5. Not a bad look. That might be the way to go. The second fight on the card, this is weird. I'm going to go ahead and stop myself because I think we were supposed to have Chris Daukaus taking on Parker Porter to start the evening. Weird that it's not here on the UFC page. You want to go ahead and break that one down?
Yeah, again, another fight, this time in the heavyweight division, where you're kind of like, for a big pay-per-view card, you maybe expect that they could have got a little further up the talent pool. Parker Porter is one of those guys. Win some, lose some. Is on a 2-fight win streak. Finishes in both of those. Most of his wins do come by finish. 8 finishes and 9 wins, only going to the judges' scorecard, only winning 1 decision. Chris Daukaus is supposed to be the prospect here. Out of the Philly, only 30 years old. He's a little bit chunky, but he's the guy that's supposed to have put it together here. 6-1 his last 7. So I think it's appropriate at the end of the day when you look at the odds on this fight. When I first looked at it, I said, man, it's probably going to be Daukaus minus 140, 150, but he's actually a small underdog in this. And again, his body type certainly doesn't have the look of an elite level MMA fighter yet, but I still think he's the more experienced guy. He's on, again, winning 6 of your last 7 fights is nothing to sneeze at in MMA period. And I'm going to lean toward him as a small dog here.
Yeah, I kind of see what you're saying, and especially with his opponent being 35 years old, Porter, he's definitely not the kind of guy that they're bringing in to show off, you know what I mean? But kind of like you were mentioning earlier, the UFC 252 main card is straight fire. This undercard, though, is a bit of a dumpster fire. Both of these guys are making their UFC debut. I mean, 8-3 versus 9-5. It's not sexy either way you dice it, in my opinion. Honestly, I kind of have to look the other way here, and it's a bit unfortunate. I've got a kind of a blind bet rule with the heavyweights, especially these mid or low tier heavyweights. If you can get the dog at a decent price, I always look for that underdog money because one punch can change everything at the heavyweight, limit. But on this one, based on what I saw, I mean, I'm not really all that impressed with Daukaus. I know he's going to be a little bit bigger. He's going to have kind of a size advantage, but especially in his fight against Azuna and Wayu, I'm definitely not pronouncing that correctly.
Where he got knocked out.
Yeah, it was in the second round, and he had this guy who's a regional scene king Absolutely in trouble. The dude is 15-6, and he gassed out so hard after about 4 minutes that this guy came back and wrecked him in the second round. And I can see Porter being the kind of guy that can pull that off. I mean, believe it or not, he's actually got some decent leg kicks. He's got good power, and he swings for the fences too. So I feel like if Chris gets a little overexerted, or if this fight gets into the second or third round, I think Porter might be able to find his way back into this one.
And maybe the total is the way to look here too. As 1.5 rounds over -115. First of all, it's rare to see heavyweight fights with the over juiced anyway. But neither one of these guys has a chin. To your point, Dakas has been knocked out 2 of his 3 wins and has no gas tank. We talked about his body type as soon as we opened. And Parker Porter has also been knocked out in 2 of his 5 losses. And at 35 years old, he's a little bit portly too. Barely making it in at 6 feet tall, but barely making it under the 265-pound limit. Both of these guys could certainly gas out quickly and be vulnerable, and that could lead to a quick fight.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. I think a finish is totally possible, especially considering we're in this small cage. The only flip side on that, and I absolutely hate it with the big men, is that you get those sloppy heavyweight fights where both guys are too gassed to do anything sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. That could certainly be the case here. And those turn into really ugly, hard-to-watch fights.
Absolutely. So good thing we're getting it out of the way early. In my opinion, we call these ones fireball and popcorn fights, Matt. We just pass. Yeah. You get your favorite drink, you get your favorite snack, sit down, and just enjoy. Don't even worry about wasting your money in these kind of spots.
That's right.
Herbert Burns taking on Daniel Pineda. Now, this one, I've got to go ahead and lead off here because I have been probably the biggest cheerleader for the Burns brothers that there has ever been. I doubted Herbert when he first stepped into the UFC because I always feel like with brothers and sister combos in the UFC, there's always the A side and the B side. It's like there's the one that's a complete badass, and then there's the other one that's just okay and kind of riding the coattails. This might be the first duo where both of them are complete badasses, and I expect big things from Herbert, even though he's probably the lesser of the two Burns brothers. What do you think?
Yeah, look, he certainly looked impressive in his last fight, but it was against an Evan Dunham that was basically should have been retired or stayed retired at that point. So, and the one thing I noticed in that fight is he still took damage on the feet. Even Evan Dunham at his age and his ability level now was still able to land on the feet against Herbert Burns. Now, don't get me wrong, Burns also showed off some of his offensive firepower on the feet in that fight. What I thought was interesting in this fight, and I hate to go to the totals for the third time, but I will be betting this total, 1.5 rounds under -140. Basically what they're saying to you at a price of -280, with the under also being heavily juiced, is that Herbert Burns is supposed to submit him in the first round. But Daniel Pineda is really good on the ground. This kid is really scrappy. He's been around. He's been in there with a lot of people. He has 18 submission wins himself, Daniel Pineda. That just goes to show you his ability on the ground. I think Herbert Burns, and what happens when you get 2 elite grapplers, sometimes it turns into a kickboxing match, where I think Herbert Burns will also enjoy an advantage. But I wouldn't be surprised if it takes Herbert a little bit longer than normal, and I'm getting plus money that I make it past 7.5 rounds. So I think I might lean that this one makes it halfway.
I don't hate it. I definitely don't hate it. I'm kind of with you on that I do feel like Herbert's had perfect matchups for these first couple of fights here in the UFC, so he's been able to get that quick finish, and now that's all everybody is expecting. And I'm right there with you on the angle that when you get two guys that are good in the same discipline, more often than not, they don't go there. For me, the only question here is Daniel Pineda, as much as he's got those 18 wins by submission, he's got 6 losses by submission as well. So he's a play with fire type of guy. I could definitely see this being a bit of a striking match, but I think it ends up on the ground at some point. And personally, I do expect Herbert to get it done. Whether it's a TKO or a submission, I do think he eventually puts Danny Chavez away. And I've actually got Herbert locked into a parlay, but the reason I like doing that is because I think Herbert can win this fight any which way. I think he can finish it by TKO. I think he can get a sub. I also think if he manages to grind out a decision here with the wrestling or something, he can make it to the cards. So rather than picking one path to victory for him, I think I'm just going to go ahead and lock him in with somebody else a little further on down the card. It might be a little bit of a wide line at minus 250, but I feel like I'm getting the right side here.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree that Herbert should win this fight and that he's actually going to be better everywhere in this fight. You know what's interesting about Pineda, and it's the only thing that keeps me from making a big play on this over, because I actually feel like this is a fight that's supposed to go into the second or third round, is that Pineda has never won a decision in his life. 26 wins, not won by decision. That's really interesting for a guy at this weight class.
Absolutely. I noticed that myself, and it's also crazy to think that he's got 26 wins. I mean, he's got an absolute landslide of experience, and he's never made it to the cards and won. That's insane to me. And the other thing I want to make sure all the listeners know on this one is that this guy comes to us from the PFL. He got two round one finishes over in the PFL, and then he popped for steroids. His last two victories have been overturned to no contest because he had elevated testosterone, and he owned up to it. He came right out and was like, yeah, I did it. I took the PEDs. So he got a bit more of a slap on the wrist because he was a good sport about it. But in my opinion, I feel like the UFC's trying to set old Herbert up again here, because there's no way that they're bringing in Daniel Pineda at 35 years old to be the next big star and derail half of their brother combo hype train here. I think they know he's coming off the testosterone. They know he's getting a little bit older, and he's been, under the scrutiny of the commission here because he has to be testing clean in these last couple of weeks. And they also know he's got a tendency to get submitted. So I really feel like I'm betting with the UFC on this one being on the side of Herbert Burns.
Yeah, absolutely. But he has, granted that he doesn't have the UFC experiences, those PFL fights, that's great experience to earn. And also he's fought in Bellator, so he's been around major organizations for a while. I just think sometimes these veterans are crafty, and they have a good understanding of at least of what people are going to do. And I don't really like him to win the fight. I just think he might be able to survive a little bit. The problem with Pineda, though, is historically he doesn't try to survive. It's kill or be killed all the time.
Yeah, and that's honestly on this one I might not even mess with the total. I don't mind your look. I always look for the plus money on the totals. Yeah. I think that's the best angle to go because, with MMA, you're locking two human beings in a cage. Who knows what these people are going to do once they get in there? So if you can roll the dice with a little bit of extra juice, I always like that look. But yeah, I don't know. If Pineda comes out guns blazing, this one could be over, just like Nate Landwehr's fight with Herbert Burns if they decide they want to throw down right away.
And gas tanks are the most unpredictable thing in UFC. I've seen so many people try to predict who this guy's going to gas or this guy's going to gas. The reason a lot of people gas in most of these fights is when you expect to have a striking battle, they get induced into a heavy grappling battle early and both expend all their energy, or you get a guy that goes for a sub and squeezes too hard, or your guy may be looking great in the first round, but now he goes for the finish too hard. And there's a lot of ways people gas in the UFC, and once they gas, fights tend to get ugly, and you never know. I mean, gassing's one of those things. You can't just make assumptions on who's going to gas and when.
Absolutely. It's a very, very valid point. And now in this next fight, I actually have a little bit of personal interest rooting here. We've got the return of Felice Herrig, one of my absolute favorite women's fighters. She's been gone forever, but she's taken on Virna Jandiroba, and this is a super dangerous fight for her comeback. I mean, Felice, she blew her ACL out. She was supposed to come back in 2019, but that got pushed back. We haven't seen her for 2 full years. I mean, she's only a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt, but they call her the little bulldog for a reason. She's physically large and strong for this weight class. She likes to stalk forward, and she likes to bully her opponents up against the cage, kind of rough them up against the fence, that kind of thing. She's got pretty solid striking in the clinch. She's not really anything special from range, and she's got a strong takedown defense rating. And I know Virna Jandiroba, she's the former UFC the Invicta FC champion. She's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. We know that she wants to take this fight to the mat. This is striker versus grappler, and I'm super intrigued to see how Felice Herrig comes back, because if you haven't checked out her Instagram lately, the girl is in shape.
Yeah, and look, for me, it's Herrig or pass here. I mean, and you have to think about Felice Herrig's career resume here. She owns wins over Courtney Casey, Justine Kish, Alexa Grasso, way back when Alexa Grasso was like the hottest woman prospect in Mexico. And her losses are all legit. Michelle Watterson, Carolina Kowalczyk, Tisha Torres, who just looked amazing in her last fight. So, and some of those are really close decision losses. I mean, and all decisions. So she's been able to hang in there with some people who wanted to take her to the ground before, including Tisha Torres. I'm a little bit torn on. I don't know. It's one of those situations where I fear that Felice Herrig's name, because people recognize her, she's been in there with so many recognizable women, that I don't know that these odds are going to get any higher. So I think if you want to take a shot with the underdog Felice Herrig here, you're better off jumping in sooner rather than later while you can get the plus 270 or plus 260, because I have a gut feeling they're going to go down a little bit, just because she's the more recognizable brand in this matchup.
I completely agree. And on top of that, she's by far the more attractive of the two fighters. And when you get those casuals rolling in later on in the week, they're going to be inclined to bet the one that they like to look at. It's just what happens. But
absolutely.
I'm completely with you here on this one. I think that it is a dog or pass situation, but I can't quite bring myself to pull the trigger on the dog. I really wanted to come in here and bet Felice Herrig, and I'm going to keep digging into this one throughout the week because I might possibly get there, especially if the lines do keep getting a little out of control here, because Felice Herrig is plus 250, like you said, plus 260 in places right now, and I feel like that is a little bit wide. I know Jandiroba has been the more active fighter, but like you said, the resume is on the side of Herrig, and her wrestling is not bad. She's got a 76% takedown defense rating, and I've seen that Jandiroba is kind of a fish out of water on the feet. So if Herrig is able to keep this thing standing, I do think she'll be able to rough her up for 15 minutes, but we are in the small octagon, and that always favors the grapplers, and I wouldn't really go so far as to call Felice Herrig a power puncher, would you?
No, not a power puncher. She's certainly a volume striker. Like she has that same build a lot of women do at that level, where she's more of a volume striker. But go back and watch that fight with Carla Esparza, and that really stood out to me as maybe it's a big step up for Jandiroba. She's not used to fighting the same level of elite competition that Felice Herrig is. And a lot of times that experience, while your ground abilities may not be as good, the fact that you've trained with so many great camps against so many great opponents, you pick things up. And I think that experience might help Felice Herrig keep this one standing. And she doesn't have to win by knockout on the feet. She just has to keep it standing, where on the feet she's going to be able to significantly outland Jandiroba. I think she's live. I think it's worth a play, but I think you got to play it now because it's, obviously the value is better at plus 270 than it's going to be at plus 220 later in the week.
Oh, you make some very valid points there, Matt. I'm extremely tempted to lock that one in. That might be one coming a little later. So those of you who have been with me for a long time know, follow me over at Diehard MMA Pod. I tweet all my plays out as soon as I go official on anything. And, yeah, I might have to roll those dice. You bring up extremely valid points, and I do also feel like Herrig is just going to be the physically stronger of the two. And when you've got that wrestling versus jiu-jitsu, I feel like the bigger, more powerful wrestlers, as long as they've got a little jiu-jitsu knowledge to stay safe in those situations, they just shut everything down. They just grind out the jiu-jitsu player, and I haven't seen anything on the feet from Virna that lets me think she'll be in any way in this fight if she can't get it working on the mat. So all right. I might have been talked into it. Let's move on before I start throwing out crazy action here. Our next fight. Oh, hey, there's Chris Dakas and Porter.
Yeah.
Didn't expect it to be this high up the card here on the UFC's official website. So,
is that how it's officially going to go?
What's that?
Is that? I mean, as of right now, I thought they were the opener.
I thought so too. Yeah. This is, I go based on the UFC site for this one, but if you look on like any other website that I've seen, it looks like they're supposed to be the opening fight, so I'm not sure what's going on there.
Yeah. All right.
We'll have to figure that out. I do want to give a quick shout out though. Now that sports are back and stuff like that, we've got the boys over at Goat Capital Sports that have been absolutely crushing it, giving out free plays and stuff like that. And I know a lot of you follow them. Make sure you let them know that Clint sent you over there. They absolutely love us, but they've got us covered: baseball, basketball, hockey, all the other stuff that I suck at. And I've actually been giving out a couple of hockey plays here and there recently. Matt, have you done anything in any of the sports now that they've bounced back?
A little bit of hockey, and picking your spots in NBA. So the one thing we've learned in NBA is so many of these matchups don't mean anything, and yet the perception is, oh, the Lakers are so great, but LeBron's not playing and they don't care. And even when the stars do play in those games, most of the positions have already been clinched going into the playoffs, and the ones that haven't, home court doesn't mean anything because you're playing in a bubble. So does it really matter if you're the 3 seed or the 6 seed? You're playing the same teams. You're not going to win. You're not going to get a home court advantage. You're playing in Orlando regardless. So we're not seeing that urgency from the better teams in the NBA, and thus you're able to pick some really good underdog spots right now.
It is a really weird time right now, and I think we're having kind of the same thing in NHL. I know that everything matters right now in NHL, but the dogs have been barking over there too. We cashed on the Columbus Blue Jackets just last night in a big way. I think that some of these bigger teams are kind of fat and happy. They're not really as worried about the season, where dogs like my Coyotes are they're live right now because they've got everything to play for, and the bigger teams are kind of a little complacent right now with this short playoff season. I just don't know if they're that sold on it, so I think we've got a chance for a lot of upsets there. So, all right, enough degeneracy.
Yeah, it looks like the Coyotes ran out of bigger teams, though. They got to face the pretty fast Colorado team next.
I'm a little worried about that one. I was hoping we could maybe pull the upset and squeeze our way into the finals or something, but the Avs coming up next, that's a tall mountain to climb.
Yeah, sure is. They're good.
All right, so Ashley Yoder taking on Livinha Souza, and this is another really interesting fight to me here. Yoder is 7-5. Souza is 13-2. Obviously, the bigger prospect of the two. Ashley, I've noticed she still goes to that head and arm throw. That's a really low-level technique that we still see used in women's MMA sometimes because they've got the hips and their opponents are light enough they're able to throw people around, but that just opens up your back. That opens up submission attacks, and you can really get made pay for that. And I'm concerned that Yoder will go to something like that in this fight. And Souza's a little monster. She is aggressive. She wings big power right hands, looking for that club and sub style. Well-timed takedowns. She scrambles super effectively, and she dives on chokes. She's looking for that finish from start to, from beginning to end on the fight. And I feel like this is all Souza all day. How do you feel on this one, Matt?
I kind of agree. I'm trying to find that path to victory here for Yoder, who has, by the way, 0 wins by knockout. So the idea of her scoring a knockout here just doesn't, and the way she fights, it just doesn't seem like that's possible. So now we go to the ground, which is Yoder's strength, but which is also the strength of Souza, who has 8 wins by submission. And I don't think she can out-grapple Souza. On the feet, I don't know that she's going to get mauled by Souza necessarily, but I do think if anyone's scoring a knockout, it's Souza, to your point with that big right hand. And they're telling us this fight's supposed to go the distance. So the over 2.5 rounds is minus 330 right now. So they're saying this fight's supposed to go the distance. And if it does, who's the fighter that's probably going to throw more volume, more significant strikes, have more ground control time? And everything points towards Souza, and it's not that big a price to lay. Someone I know who made a really sharp comment, who's really sharp at MMA, who was looking at the other side as me, said, well, Yoder's losses are all against legit people. Angela Hill and Mackenzie Dern and Randa Marcos and one more on her. Oh, Justine Kish. So they were all pretty legit losses, especially Hill and Mackenzie Dern. Mm-hmm. And maybe Souza doesn't have the experience level, but I actually thought she looked okay against Brianna Van Buren, who's a pretty tough customer herself. And that's her only loss in the UFC. I'm actually starting to think that minus 150 range might be cheap on Livinha Souza here.
I completely agree with you, and I was very, very confused when I saw money come in the other way. When I first broke down this fight, she was sitting at going, that's a little expensive for a semi-unknown women's MMA fighter. We've seen a lot of these women's favorites get upset recently, and I didn't really want to go there. But now that we're looking at minus 150, I'm not sure who out there is taking Yoder, except maybe by purely looking at her size advantage, because I know she's gonna have a 6-inch reach advantage. She's gonna be the taller woman by about 4 inches. But honestly, I feel like that's almost a disadvantage here, because when you get in the small cage and you're fighting a grappler, that makes it that much easier to get under your hips. I know normally you like to look for the taller person, but she's not John Jones. She is not the type of fighter that's going to have, the balance and be able to utilize that reach and experience and keep it, standing. I honestly am very tempted to go ahead and lock it up with Souza, very much like I did with Dariush last week, and then maybe even look by submission for Souza, because I feel like she can put Yoder away here. I don't know that they're on the same level.
Yeah, I will say this. Yoder's done a good job. I feel like in some of her fights, she goes in there just to survive. Like against Mackenzie Dern, against Angela Hill, she looked completely outmatched, but looked like she was in there to survive. And I wonder if that's going to be the case here. She's never been stopped. I mean, she has 5 losses, all 5 of those losses by decision, and the over is -330. But I just think that in a situation, if it does go to the judges' scorecard again, who's going to get that ground control time? Who's going to, throw more volume on the feet, land more significant strikes? And it feels like Souza on all 3.
I completely agree. And, the only thing that I'd want to dispute there is I'm always hunting those unders, and I'm always hunting those plus lines if I can ever get my hands on them.
Yeah.
Yoder, like you mentioned, she goes in there against Mackenzie Dern, and I like Mackenzie Dern. I like her a lot, but she's kind of a one-trick pony. If she doesn't get the submission, she doesn't have a whole lot to offer on the feet. Same thing with, Angela Hill back in the day. This was before Angela Hill became the one we know today back in 2017. Correct. She was a volume-striking decision machine without power in her hands that never went to the ground or anything like that. And Yoder's coming off a loss to Randa Marcos, who has looked absolutely awful in her last couple of fights. And she got outstruck 78-44 by Randa Marcos. Going to split decision with somebody like that, like you said, simply surviving. Her opponent here in Souza is mean. And I mean, she is a bad woman. She comes in here with killer intent. Her ground and pound is nasty. Her jiu-jitsu game is nasty. And it's not like how our girl, I'm sorry, I'm mixing up all my names now. It's not how Dern is, where if she can't get the takedown, if she can't get the submission, she's just going to do whatever it takes to grind out the win. Yeah. I feel like Souza's going to come out here and she can alternate between ground and pound submission attempts, things like that. She will work for that finish if she gets to a dominant position. So, I'm probably just going to go ahead and lay that -150 at this point, because I don't think that number's going to stay there. I'll bet you it goes back the other direction as more people dig into this fight. And then maybe just a little sprinkle on the inside the distance line a little later in the week.
I don't hate it. 10 of her 13 wins come inside the distance for Souza. So certainly there's some precedent there for, you're going to get +260, +270 when 75% of Souza's wins come inside the distance. Certainly it seems like the value lies on that side.
I like it. Now, do you do anything, Matt, as far as I know on the show we do official bets, things like that. We let everybody know what we're on, what we're actually betting. Is that something you want to recap at the end of the evening if you've actually locked anything in, or if you intend to, or do you want to kind of do it as we're going?
Sure. I'm happy to. I'm happy to go as we go. Anytime I make a bet on stuff, I'm happy to tell people. And I bet throughout the week, so the card tends to stack up as it goes. But I like betting early in the week too, especially if you think you're going to get a better number.
Absolutely, I completely agree. The ones that jump out at me, I lock in those numbers immediately when they jump out at me, and then I usually add 3 or 4 more plays throughout the week. Sometimes that bites me in the ass, though. We've got 342 live viewers right now.
Covered is Pineda Burns over. I bet that over at +130 already.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Everybody pull your notebooks out. Take notes. That's what we're on for official bets here. We've got 340 live viewers right now. I want to say thank you to each and every one of you. Again, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe over here to Odds HQ. Let the algorithms know that you like what we're doing, because that's how we get to bring this free content to you and awesome guests like our man here, Matt Holt. So thank you again for spending this evening with us, Matt. I appreciate it. We've got an absolute veteran of the sport in Jim Miller, a man who I have just not been able to figure out lately, coming back against Vince from Hell Pichel. This is a super interesting fight, in my opinion. It's an appropriate level fight for a guy like Jim where he's at in his career. And like I said, I just can't seem to figure this guy out. Every time I try to go against Jim, he shows up and he pulls off that first round submission. And now I'm sitting here thinking maybe I should bet on Jim, but I keep zigging when I should be zagging. And tell me what's going on in this fight. Help me out, Matt, because I can't figure it out.
Well, what's really interesting about this fight is, everyone, you even said it yourself, the veteran Jim Miller, but Jim Miller's the younger guy in this fight. I mean, that's one of those things that's actually would, I think, surprise most people, is that Jim Miller's the younger guy here. And that at only 36 years old, you could make a case, and some people do. I'm not as high on Jim Miller as some people I know, that if he didn't have that Lyme disease, then Jim Miller's entire career would have looked much different. But instead, he tried to fight through Lyme disease and went on a really bad run in the UFC where his reputation and his credibility took a huge hit. But once that cured, if you look, he's won 3 or 4, and so he's on a better run lately. Look, both these guys come off the same win, Roosevelt Roberts, right? Miller was able to submit him. Pichel beat him by decision. What's interesting is I think Miller's last 4 or 5 wins are all by submission. He's kind of turning into a one-trick pony, is my concern, is if he doesn't get it done with that big submission, he tends to get beat nowadays. The problem trying to figure this one out is, even though Jim Miller is winning fights again all of a sudden, they're against Clay Guida. The Roosevelt Roberts came out of nowhere. He was a huge underdog, caught him in that great submission early in the first round. But the other wins are Jason Gonzalez, Alex White. I mean, they aren't the best guys. And every time he stepped up, Anthony Pettis, Francisco Trinaldo, Dan Hooker, Dustin Poirier, Charles Oliveira, the Hot Sauce Holtzman, all beat him. Now, granted, those are all really tough guys. So where is he at? And Pinkel on the other side, Pichel, his only losses are to Khabilov and Gregor Gillespie 2-back. And Gregor Gillespie 2-back was still undefeated. I mean, that guy was really on the rise.
He's a monster.
A beast. And then and again, you beat Roosevelt Roberts recently, Garrett Whitley, Joaquim Silva, some legit wins. The only thing that worries me in this fight a little bit is Jim Miller's had trouble with these guys that hit hard, like Dustin Poirier, Trinaldo, Hooker. And while Pichel does have 8 or 9 knockouts, I forget what it is, in his UFC wins, which he has 5 of, 4 of his 5 UFC wins come by decision. So like a lot of guys who rack up massive amounts of knockouts on the regional scene, since he came over to the UFC, he hasn't been knocking people out. It's mostly been by decision. And the longer this fight goes, I think the more opportunities you give a guy like Jim Miller to wrap something up. At a pick'em price, even though he's the older guy, even though he's probably less likely to finish the fight, I would probably still go with Pichel.
Yeah, I can absolutely see it. And the one thing I was afraid of, and why I haven't locked an actual bet in on this one, is that I could feel like this fight goes a whole lot like the Scott Holtzman fight. Jim Miller came out like a bat out of hell in that first round, like he always does. He was landing big left hands the entire time, and then he slowed down. As soon as his opponent started to kind of get the respect back with the power striking and things like that, he kind of shelled up a little bit. His gas tank doesn't seem to be quite what it used to, and I really feel like the Roosevelt Roberts armbar was a bit fluky. I mean, I know that's what Jim does, but I think Roberts is better than that, and I would probably go back to that well and bet on him again if they did do the rematch. So I'm totally there with you. I might have to pass, but maybe Pichel is the right side on this one. He's got the more impressive record. Like you said, he is a little bit older, but he's been less active. He doesn't have as many miles on him as Jim does at this stage of his career, even though he's older. And the only thing, I guess, that worries me a little bit about Pichel is I'm not sure what kind of shape he's coming in here for this fight. We haven't seen him since back in 2019, and this will be his first COVID fight. I know that's kind of a different experience for these guys, and he's one of these guys that's been plagued with injuries basically his entire career. It's cost him a lot of fight opportunities, lots of pullouts, stuff like that, because he just hasn't really been able to stay healthy. So I don't know. This may be kind of a later in the week or one of my weigh-in video type of pull the trigger situations. I want to see what these guys look like right before the fight, see them face off, see who's got that fire in their eyes, because that might make all the difference.
I absolutely agree. And what's interesting is I thought, look, if not for that crazy armbar early in the first round that Jim Miller gets, I think Roosevelt Roberts is going to hammer Jim Miller in that fight. He's just going to absolutely hammer him. Like, it didn't feel competitive until that fluky armbar happened. Whereas Pichel beat Roosevelt Roberts. There was no question who won that fight. They went 3 rounds. He was the better man for every minute of that fight. That wasn't the case. They both have wins over Roosevelt Roberts, but Vince Pichel beat Roosevelt Roberts. And to me, that really stands out.
You know, that's a really strong argument, Matt. That's something that I didn't really consider, and you're absolutely right. I mean, catching somebody in a submission or even like a flash knockout, you never know what that looks like when you run it back, but beating somebody pillar to post for 15 straight minutes, that matters. So I think you might have something there. I feel like I'm going to be looking a whole lot harder at Vince Pichel over the next couple of days than I will be at Jim Miller. And, you know, like I said, I've been zigging when I should be zagging with Jim Miller. That's been kind of the story of my history betting him recently. And the fact that I was leaning Jim Miller and now we're talking about reasons to bet on his opponent, that makes perfect sense. I'm okay to go against myself here because I was against him last time out with Roosevelt Roberts and I had all the right reasons in the world to be against him. So I might be a little results oriented here trying to look to bet on him now all of a sudden because he cost me money last time out.
Sure. I mean, that happens all the time. There's plenty of guys that I don't have any read on whatsoever.
Yeah, and that's, you know what, Cowboy was another one of the old era fighters that I really struggled with. It didn't matter if I bet on or against him, over, under, I lost every single time. In fact, his fight with Tony Ferguson, I got saved by the doctor stoppage. I had the under 2.5, and it wasn't for his eye puffing up like that. They were going to the cards.
For sure. Yeah, for sure they were.
This might be the under the radar fight of the night coming up next year, Matt. We have got Magomed Ankalaev taking on the Hulk Ion Cutelaba in a big time rematch. Everybody should remember how this fight went the first time around. Magomed Ankalaev looked to land a huge head kick, and Ion looked like he was in some serious trouble. But when you go back and watch the replay, that kick never landed. Ion catches the kick, and not a single shot got through, but Ion goofed around enough that the referee actually stepped in and waved the fight off because he thought Ion was out on his feet when he was actually very defensively sound. And now, in this rematch, Ion is a full $1 higher on the price tag. I think Magomed Ankalaev was a minus 200 favorite. I actually went ahead and doubled down on him. I laid 4 units to win 2 that night because I did feel that Ankalaev was just that much more superior of a fighter. Felt lucky to get that type of a win because obviously it was not deserving. Now we flip around a couple months down the road and they're saying he's worth $1 more when he didn't do jack in the first fight. What's your breakdown on this one?
Well, we didn't really get to see what was going to happen in that first fight. It was, like 29 or 30 seconds in? I mean, it was really fast in where Kevin McDonald jumps in. And to me, that's where it started my annoyance with, with Michael Bisping and all the little stuff. Because you clearly hear, and Kevin McDonald admitted that he heard it too. You can't help but hear Michael Bisping screams, Cutelaba's out on his feet. He's done, man. He never got hit once. And I don't know if he was fooling around or if he just thought he was dodging punches because his actions you could make a case that he's doing both. But the one thing we do know he was doing was throwing back hard at the same time. Now, neither guy was landing. They were both kind of all over the place and throwing at each other hard. But we never got to see what really happens when these two throw down. And is there a skill level difference? Is there a big-time technical difference in the striking? Because they just went to throwing haymakers right away, and the fight got stopped. Kevin McDonald pulled the trigger way too quick, stopped the fight. We don't really know. But I'm with you. There's no way I'm laying 300, because if they get to throwing leather like they did the last time, it's going to be a matter of whoever lands first. And Cutelaba can bang. This is a guy who can really get in there and fire some guys up. We've seen it historically. His losses are to Glover Teixeira and Jared Cannonier and other guys who can bang. But look what he did to Khalil Roundtree or Henrique Del Silva. I mean, both these guys can fire. They're both big-time knockout punchers. And I'm trying to look back real quick to see. How many knockouts Cutelaba? Yeah, 12 of his 15 wins by knockout. So this is a guy who also gets it done on the feet. I think maybe the value, let's just assume for the sake of this that they come out and get after it like they did in the first time. Under 1.5 rounds, how long can you keep that pace up? I mean, they were getting after it. Cutelaba was throwing bombs in response. I think this one, it's hard for me to imagine in the small 25-foot octagon that forces you to engage, that the stylistic matchup here allows this fight to go more than 7.5 minutes. And I already bet the under 1.5. I had to lay 115, but it's close to a pick 'em at a lot of places. And I think the value all lies in the under. I mean, you have 8 KOs for Ankalaev in 13. You have 12 KOs for Cutelaba, and they both just flat get after it. Mm-hmm. And they're going to accommodate each other's styles. I remember that Cutelaba fight. I was actually there that night in person when they fought at the Palms. It was Demetrius Johnson and what's his name that won the tough contest?
Elliott
in the championship fight, and this was on the undercard. And at the time, you didn't know a lot about either guy. Cannonier was kind of coming up, and they threw down. Like, I've never seen a Cutelaba fight where he didn't throw down. He almost knocked out Glover Teixeira.
Oh, you mean you were at the Tough 24 finale when Ion Cutelaba fought Jared Cannonier?
Yes, at the.
I was live at that fight that night too.
Oh, you really?
I was in Vegas.
Oh, nice! That's so awesome. Nice, yeah. That was a good card. It had Henry Cejudo and
it was surprisingly good.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, it was fun.
Nobody knew a lot of those names that night.
For Elliott. Yeah, Elliott had brought all his boys in the tie-dyes. Yeah, it was fun. It was a good time. It was a good card.
That was a solid night of fights.
I think this one's going to be a throwdown. So I think you can make a case for Cutelaba. Better resume, fought tougher dudes, and you can make a case that this thing doesn't go 7.5 minutes in that 25-foot cage, and also bet the under and not be disappointed when either one of them goes down, because somebody's going down.
That's a good way to look at it. That's definitely entirely possible. I mean, Ankalaev's only loss was that fluky submission to my boy Paul Craig at the literal last second of the fight. And like you said, Ion Cutelaba, this dude throws heavy. They call him the Hulk for a reason. Man, I love how most of the time I hate it when fighters get emotional and stuff like that. I love when the Hulk gets emotional. He's like screaming in his opponent's faces at the weigh-ins. The time he scared Khalil Roundtree, this dude's a character. I absolutely love him. And part of me is actually tempted to roll the dice on Cutelaba just because I feel like that line is too wide at this point, considering the last fight. He looked way more defensively sound than I think we have ever seen him. I honestly feel like Cutelaba is going to put up a better fight than he's shown us before against upper-tier competition, but I'm also kind of in the boat that I feel like Magomed is one of these potential future champion type of fighters, so this one might end up just being a fireball and popcorn type of fight for me. Might just have to sit back and enjoy this one.
Yeah, I already bet the under, and I like that position. I just think someone gets it done early. And these are the type of fights that have all ended early in the Apex Center in Vegas in the small 25-foot octagon. 2 power punchers in there in the small octagon, 10 solids of finishes. I'm going to keep that trend going here with under 1.5 rounds.
I like it. I will wish you luck on that one. I'm probably just going to sit back. Let's move this thing along. We are cruising this evening on these breakdowns. Make sure everybody head on over to Twitter. Let everyone know what we're doing tonight. Let them know that you're joining the show here, and give Matt some love. He's given us some time here, and we really appreciate you hanging out with us. Also, make sure you're subscribing to Odds HQ. This one's another fun one. John Dodson, one of my personal favorite fighters, just so fun, always happy, always smiling, loves to be in that cage, taking on the machine Merab Dvalishvili. This one is a weird matchup. One of these fights I just never thought I'd see. You know, if you ask me what are some fights that I feel like are coming up, this one wouldn't have ever even been on my radar. John Dodson is way undersized for this division. For bantamweight, he's too small. He can still crack. He's fast. He's got good, footwork and hand speed and stuff, but that'll only get you so far. I know he knocked out Woodson in his last fight, but that was a bit of a referee saving for Woodson. I feel like that stoppage was maybe a little bit earlier. I know Dodson has, pistons for hands, so if the referee doesn't pull him off, he probably does get the clean TKO there. But Woodson wasn't by any means out yet from that shot. And Merab is one of these guys who's just so damn durable. I don't see John Dodson knocking out Merab. Do you?
No, he's never been knocked out. I mean, it's one of those situations where I think he's only been finished once, and it was a guillotine choke by Ricky Simon, right, for Merab. So he's never been knocked out. I do think John Dodson legitimately got Nathaniel Wood in that last fight. Like, he starched him. Like, he got him. But you're right. He's way too small at 35. And what we had seen historically, and he's 4-4 in his last 8, is once he moved up to 35 after challenging Demetrius Johnson twice, is that power didn't carry up with him. He wasn't a big, huge 125-pounder. It's just that he had fought and lost to the champion twice. Where do you go now? So they moved up to 35, where that power didn't necessarily follow him. The hand speed and footwork, to your point, are still great. And look, this is a guy that owns wins over Pedro Munoz, who's going to fight Frankie Edgar next. Knocked out Nathaniel Wood, who bounced back and looked good in his last one. Beat up Eddie Wineland, the former champion. I mean, he has some really impressive wins, and his losses come against the best guys in the world: Peter Yan, Marlon Moraes, Jimmy Rivera, Demetrius Johnson twice. I mean, John Dodson beat anybody who's not the best in the world. I just think this is such a bad stylistic matchup. What did DJ do to him? Took him down over and over. And if he can't avoid that takedown here and he doesn't have the power to keep Merab off him, then I don't know how this doesn't turn into another long night for him. I will say this: if this line gets to around like Merab minus 220, 230, John Dodson's going to become real appealing to me because he has a long history of beating guys that are just below that top rung.
That's a good point. And you're absolutely right. The strength of schedule with John Dodson is fantastic. I don't know why he doesn't go back down to 125 at this point, though. Yeah. After dropping those 2 fights to DJ's out of town, and everyone's kind of moving around. There's finally some shuffling here at 125. It's exciting. It's interesting. Drop back down where you can make an impact.
Take one more run.
Yeah. I mean, because I think he's still got it. Obviously, he's still got the speed. He's still got the timing. He just is too dang small at 135. And I think that this is a spot where it's like when Ricky Simone fought Ray Borg. It's just an awful stylistic matchup when you have got a guy who needs to be able to move around and can't get pinned down, otherwise he's going to lose. You're going up against the guy that's all he does. And we're cutting off the cage, too. We're doing the smaller cage. You're in there against a guy who's twice your size. And Merab, they call him the machine for a reason. This guy does the chain wrestling Khabib style, where it's not 1 takedown attempt, it's not 2, it's 3, it's 4. He's constantly hitting those second takedown attempts. And he's just going to either pin Dodson up against the fence, or he's going to take him down. When Dodson gets back up, he's going to put him right back down. The other thing is, I think Dodson's advantage over most people is his cardio and his speed. I don't think he's got those here either. Merab is one of these freak athletes that just doesn't slow down. I actually took a shot at fading Merab in a spot that I thought maybe he had peaked when he took on Casey Kenny. Casey Kenny had some success with him on the feet. Casey Kenny's another guy that can scramble with him on the ground, has a good gas tank, and Merab broke him. I just don't see how John Dodson wins in this spot. And I know you were saying there might be some value on him if he gets up to minus 220, minus 230, something like that. But honestly, I feel like this is Merab all day. I'm closing out my parlay with Herbert Burns, and I'm taking Merab to go ahead and close that down. It comes out to about plus 110, and I'm laying 2.2 units to win 2 units on that parlay. I just think that this is... Sometimes it's hard to overcome that bad stylistic matchup, and I see both of those guys getting it done one way or the other. I know Dodson's super hard to finish. I don't think Merab's much of a finisher himself. It's probably going to... Yeah, it's going to be a decision, but I think Merab absolutely gets it done.
I mean, the total being 2.5 over minus 300, they're telling you what's supposed to happen here, which is a whole bunch of ground control time for Merab, which is most likely going to be the case. And to your point, maybe in the 30-foot octagon, Dodson could use the footwork a little better to kind of dance around, get out of the way, and land one of those big right hands and then follow it up. And even if he doesn't knock him out, at least keep the fight standing. But I just don't see that in the small cage either. I think it would take something a little bit fluky, like he'd have to hurt Merab, which we haven't seen yet, to stay in it. I'm just not sure that's going to happen. And I think it's going to be a little bit of a boring fight to watch because chances are that he's so tough, Dodson, that it's, he's going to fight it every inch of the way, but it's just going to be Merab holding him down. And it's not going to be the most exciting affair, but it could end up being 30-27 by the time we get to the cards.
I completely agree with you, and unfortunately, sometimes those boring fights are the best ones for us to bet. You just sit back and you watch the seconds tick off the clock, and every single time you're rubbing your hands if everything is going to plan. And I couldn't have broke it down any better. With the bigger cage, I think Dodson could put that speed to work. He could literally sprint away from Merab to reset the distance and then put his striking to work, get the big guy chasing him, and then plant and come back with a right bomb, something. He's got options in that bigger cage. In the smaller cage, there's just less room to work, and I think that's going to get him.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So we're closing in here. We're getting towards the top of this card, and this is where the good stuff all starts to pile up here. Junior Dos Santos taking on Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And what a heavyweight fight is this? I mean, there's just something. It's a spectacle. We all love watching the big boys. We all love watching the knockout artists and the heavyweights go at it. This is a solid card for big boy action, and both these guys need a win. We've got Junior Dos Santos coming off of 2 back-to-back losses, both knockouts, and then we've got Jairzinho fresh off of practically getting murdered by Francis Ngannou a couple of months ago. Who gets this bounce back, Matt?
So I actually have a bet on the under in this one too, and again because it's heavyweight power punchers at 1.5, and the unders I laid 115. It's pretty close to a pick 'em. And at the end of the day, we all know Rozenstruik is 10-1 with 9 knockouts. Almost every single one of his wins come by knockout. JDS has lost 2 straight by knockout and has 15 knockouts himself and 21 wins and has been knocking people out again lately. That's how he's been getting his wins, including Tai Tuivasa and Ben Rothwell. Knocked out Derek Lewis, right? I mean, this is a guy that can really bang in JDS. And these two are going to go in there and bang. And neither of them has shown a ton of durability. I mean, Rozenstruik, we saw what happened against Ngannou, and JDS basically, as soon as people put any big leather on that chin, he's been going to sleep lately. Neither one of them are that old, although you could say that JDS may be on the wrong side of the mountain because the amount of wars he's been in. If I had to pick a side, I actually lean toward JDS a little bit. I'm not in love with Rozenstruik's technique. His power is amazing, but we saw when he stepped up in class against Alistair Overeem right before Alistair went to Elevation Fight Team, that if that fight, lasts another 30 seconds, Overeem clearly wins the decision in that fight. So it wasn't like he went in there and beat up Alistair Overeem. He went in there and got mauled by Alistair Overeem and then landed one big shot that I think looked scarier than it was because his lips split wide open and he kind of looked like Alien, and the referee stopped it. But if we get, 20 more seconds, it's an Overeem decision. And we never have to see Ngannou versus Rozenstruik at all, which he was completely outmatched in that fight. I just think they're going to get in there and bang, and because Rozenstruik power is so good and JDS's chin is certainly suspect at this point, he has a path to victory. But as a minus 150 favorite, I don't agree with that. I think the more technical striker is JDS. I think if it does happen to go to the ground, which isn't likely, but guys get tangled up. I mean, look at the Bellator, Timothy Johnson-Mitrione the other night. They weren't trying to go to the ground. It just happens. It happens with big guys a lot. If it does end up on the ground, JDS is going to own him on the ground. So I already played the under, but I'm looking to play JDS. And my thought process is Rozenstruik, people love these big KO guys, and they're going to show a couple of videos of Alistair Overeem's lips splitting way across his face. and people are going to keep betting Rozenstruik. And when I can get plus 150, I'm going to hop in on JDS as well and have JDS and the under.
I like the way you think, Matt, and I have a personal vendetta against Jairzinho Rozenstruik because I was on Alistar Overeem that fight, and he played that game perfectly.
Yeah.
He did everything right that entire fight, and like you said, if the referee just doesn't step in and wave it off, because he was getting up, he was still standing up, he was still with it, he wasn't out cold. We needed 4 seconds.
Yes.
I would have cashed my bet on Alistar Overeem. So I've been a little testy with Jairzinho Rozenstruik myself ever since. The other thing I want to point out is if everybody hasn't done their social media stalking, which your boy always does my social media stalking before these UFC fights, Junior has found the fountain of youth. He's got a brand new doctor, it's looking like. And we haven't seen Junior in this kind of shape in years. He is either taking this fight more seriously than he ever has, or like I said, he's found a good, new, solid doctor. And honestly, I feel like this is a great spot for Junior Dos Santos. He might be my underdog of the evening, even though he's coming off of 2 knockout losses. Francis Ngannou destroyed Jairzinho just 2.5 months ago. And something I always like to talk about is with those big knockout losses, that was a life-changing knockout loss. Yeah. Your durability could be shot forever because of that kind of a knockout. And we've seen people like Stipe, for example, who we'll talk about in the main event. He went a long fight with Francis Ngannou. And I think that is part of why Daniel Cormier won the first fight with Stipe, was because he hadn't fully recovered from the damage that Francis put on him. Jairzinho is coming back in here in 2 months. He needs to take 9 months to a year off after that kind of a knockout. And like you said, a guy like Junior, he's still got his hand speed. He's still got his power. He uses those leg kicks very well. And we haven't seen Junior go to the ground very often, but after seeing what Alistar Overeem did, I would not be shocked if he shot for a takedown and tried to put Jairzinho on his back. I think that Junior is extremely live in this situation, and I haven't bet it yet because I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I'm hoping more people will jump on Jairzinho and give me a little bit better of a line, but if it keeps on plummeting, if it keeps on dipping down, it peaked at about plus 135, and it's back down to about 130. If it drops to 125, 120, maybe I jump on it sooner than later. But I think you've got the right look with the under 1.5. In the smaller cage, the only thing I'd be concerned with is both guys coming off knockout losses. Maybe they come out a little bit more tentative than they otherwise would. But with the amount of power that both of them are possessing, it's not going to take a whole lot for one of them to go down, I think.
No, I agree. And as soon as one of them connects, it's over. So I really like the under. I think at the end of the day, by the time they step in the octagon, the under 1.5 rounds is going to be around 130, 140. So you're certainly getting 20 to 25 cents of value right now by betting it today. But I want to make sure I get JDS at an underdog price as well, because I actually think he has more ways to win this fight and is probably the better fighter.
Agreed. And that's where Jairzinho, he's transitioning over from what, the kickboxing world. He is not a well-rounded mixed martial artist, and that's something I feel like we have to see always be something that people consider. The well-rounded mixed martial artist more often than not wins these fights. And again, I am very, very intrigued by whatever Junior is putting in his body right now, because even coming off of 2 knockout losses, normally I wouldn't look to bounce back and have somebody come back and get a win after that kind of a situation, but he may be a little bit more durable than we're used to seeing him with the way he's looking on Instagram. So I like that we kind of align thought-wise on that one. I think that's a good look for an underdog.
And let's face it, the way that Curtis Blades brings that ground and pound that Rozenstruik doesn't. That's not how Rozenstruik gets his knockouts. And when they just stand and technically strike, I think JDS is just as technical a striker as Rozenstruik is, and brings a lot to the table there. And I think it's going to be an interesting night for sure.
I completely agree. And it was the threat of the takedown. I talk about that all the time on the show. It was the threat of the takedown that got the knockout against Junior Dos Santos' last fight there against Blades. because he was way concerned with defending that takedown and just kept on dropping his hands. And, pardon me. Excuse me. Sorry about that, everybody. We're doing it live.
That's it.
He dropped his hands, tried to defend the takedown, and then that missile of a right hand is what knocked him out.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a much better matchup. He can just stand, focus on the striking, and I think you're going to see a better JDS. And either way, somebody's getting out of there early. It's not going 7.5 minutes.
Not really.
Testing. How about that?
Now I get it.
Back?
Yeah, I get you. Back. Nice.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Not sure what happened. All right. So let's start over here. Co-main event, Sean O'Malley taking on Marlon Vera. This kid has been the hype train of the UFC. He's the next big star. He's the guy that people are looking to be the next McGregor. And honestly, I feel like the UFC is giving him the McGregor treatment. I feel like he's getting the right steps up in competition every single time. At every turn, at every corner, the UFC is handing him somebody who is beatable to make sure he grows at the right pace. And this is his first real step up in competition against Marlon Chito Vera, a guy that I have bet on a lot recently because he's just a violent finisher. I mean, this guy comes to go to war every single time. And it makes me a little bit sad here in this spot because I don't think I can pull the trigger on him. He's such a big, juicy underdog. But from everything that I've seen from Sugar Sean O'Malley, I don't think that Marlon Vera is going to be able to do anything to him. How do you feel on this one, Matt?
I actually agree. I think it's easy to land on Marlon Vera here. I think it's easy to say, well, Vera probably should have beat Yadong Song, or at least it was really close. You could make a case that the fight could have gone either way. And that if that happened, he's on a 6-fight win streak, and he's ranked. He's probably ranked a little bit too high to even be looking at Sean O'Malley at this point, and maybe they would avoid him. But I think the biggest problem in this matchup is that Marlon Vera is a slow starter, period. And it got me thinking about something that happened recently. So I was watching that Bellator card, which we just mentioned a minute ago. And Benson Henderson kept saying before the fight, I'm going to start faster. I'm against Michael Chandler. I'm going to start faster. And I'm like, no, you're not. You never start fast, right? People are who they are in MMA. But he did. He did start faster in that fight. Now, of course, it got him knocked out in the first round. But Marlon Vera needs to also start faster in this fight. Because if he starts at the same slow pace that he tends to start at, he has to get hit a few times to wake up and get in the fight and get things going. Sean O'Malley's going to knock him out. And Sean O'Malley's going to end up having a spectacular KO finish against a really tough, really talented guy. Whereas I do think that if Vera gets into this fight right away, then he certainly has all the skills to beat him. And what we haven't seen yet is what happens when someone gets Sean O'Malley on the ground, because Marlon Vera's ground game is really effective. So I want to bet Marlon Vera too, and I know a lot of people are, and I know he's going to be a popular underdog, and I know you're laying a big premium by betting on Sean O'Malley. There is a big premium attached to it. But there is a big premium attached to Conor too, and he won fights. And if you bet against him, you lost all your money for a long time. Whether it was Chad Mendez or Jose Aldo or Eddie Alvarez, people made plenty of cases to bet against Conor, and they lost all those fights. And it wasn't until he was a huge favorite against Nate Diaz on short notice that he finally lost one himself and kind of broke that run. I want to bet Marlon Vera. I don't know what the price point is. And maybe this is a scenario where as we get later in the week, Vera looks good at weigh-ins or he looks good in workouts. And suddenly I'm more tempted to bet him because I really like Marlon Cheeto Vera. I just right now I can't pull the trigger. But I will say this against Sean O'Malley. In the fights that where he tends to get out of his striking zone early, Terrion Ware and Andre Sokenthant, he didn't look amazing in those fights, Sean O'Malley. And he has 3 wins by decision in his whole career. 2 of them have come since he joined the UFC. It's just lately he looks so amazing. But to your point, Eddie Wineland was made for him to look amazing against. Marlon Vera is a completely different animal. My only fear here is that Marlon Vera is such a slow starter and Sean O'Malley throws power punches out of the gate.
Absolutely. And I think the other key here going against Marlon Vera is that he's not much of a wrestler. He's got a sick jiu-jitsu game. He's a complete badass on the ground, but he's not a wrestler. He's not going to come in and get a big power double leg. And we heard Henry Cejudo talking about the first mid-tier wrestler that gets his hands on this kid, Sean O'Malley, is going to expose him. And I think that's part of why this matchup happened. Marlon Vera's not a wrestler. And on top of that, if he can't put his ground game to work, I mean, we saw in his last fight, he goes for like standing arm triangle chokes. He will look to wrap you up any way possible. Yeah. Sean O'Malley still has a 2-inch reach advantage in this fight. I mean, Vera's got one of the longest reaches in this division, and O'Malley still has him beat.
Yeah.
I just don't think that Vera's going to be able to close the distance effectively against O'Malley, and if he does, I don't think he's got the wrestling he needs to take this fight to the mat. So again, if we're going to have a stand-up fight, it's levels difference. Sean O'Malley is so much better than Marlon Vera is on the feet, and he's not going to be the type of guy that gets suckered into a brawl where Marlon Vera can use a flying knee or clinch him up or something. That's not what Sean O'Malley does. He's going to stay on the outside. He's going to fire power shots. He's going to feint. That's one of the best things that he does. That's how he got the knockout against Eddie Wineland, is that little feint uppercut that he threw in there before he threw that absolute missile of a right hand to put him to the floor. I just think he's going to chip away at Vera. And Vera's one of these tough, ironclad dudes. He'll come and he'll go to war. He will go out on his shield before he gives up in that fight. And I'm afraid that's how it's going to happen.
I don't disagree. And look, I love Marlon Vera, but one of his best strengths, and I lost money in his last fight. I bet him against Yadong Song because I thought the value is with Vera. We almost got there. It was close enough. But
I did too.
Yeah, but he didn't quite get home. But the one thing that happened in that fight, again, with starting slow, is when it gets to 2 guys being fresh at the beginning of a fight, he's not as technically sound on the feet as these guys. Where he looks good striking is as your opponents start to fatigue and they've hit you with everything and you're still in front of them. Now he's that guy in the pocket just firing away and he's in there. But when it's 2 guys fresh, technical strikers, his technical striking isn't that good. And I bet on Marlon Vera last fight. He lost that first round badly to Yadong Song. When they were both fresh and their striking was really crisp, Yadong Song was faster, he was crisper, he was landing the better shots. And if Sean O'Malley gets off to that hut of a start, Marlon Vera could find himself really beat up or even KO'd before he even gets a chance to get in this one.
I completely agree. And I think Vera's one of these guys that has to turn it up as the fight goes, and that's, like you said, he kind of gets in there, he brawls, he clinches with people, and that's how he really takes over fights. I don't think you're taking over against Sean O'Malley. I don't think that that's something that you're going to be able to like work your... I mean, maybe he'll prove me wrong. I like Marlon Vera. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, but I just don't think he can turn the tide on this kind of a kid. And I think Sean O'Malley is going to have a significant speed advantage here. I know he's got a speed advantage over pretty much everybody, so that may be kind of a dumb thing to say because, of course he has the speed advantage. But I think that's something that Vera's really going to struggle with on the feet. So what I actually ended up doing is just for a little bit of fun. I've got that 2-leg parlay where I'm risking 2.2 units to win 2. I just tossed Sean O'Malley on top of it and put another unit on it. That pays plus 177. So I've got Burns, Merab, and O'Malley in a 3-leg parlay at plus 177. I feel like that's one where if something happens and Marlon Vera shows up, if that big clinch knee shows up that I'm not expecting to, I'll pay that 3-leg parlay. I know 3-leggers are not normally something that have a good ROI. The more legs that you add to a parlay, the more dangerous it gets. But I'm pretty solid confident on the other two fighters getting it done. And that's just a little extra sprinkle on top. And then I'm not laying that full, minus 350 or whatever it is right now on Sean O'Malley.
Yeah, it's too pricey for me to get involved with O'Malley. I'm trying to figure out a way to talk myself onto Marlon Vera, but I'm not anywhere close yet to being able to get there.
I gotcha. The other way you could look at it potentially is Sean O'Malley inside the distance. Like I said, both these guys are finishers. They're going to be going for it. Vera will go out on his shield. We've seen O'Malley finishing basically everybody, and that's plus 145. So if you wanted to not pay that 310 price tag, you could do 1 unit on the inside the distance prop and just look for him to get it done. Similarly, they've got the total set at 2.5. Right now it's somehow juiced to the over at minus 125.
Yeah.
That under 2.5 at minus 105 doesn't look so bad to me.
I agree. There's certainly a scenario where, both guys win by finish. So, and in the smaller octagon, we see a lot more finishes. So that could certainly be a value play as well.
All right. Are you ready to break down the main event, the big one, the one we're all here for?
Yeah.
So real quick, right before we dive into this thing, we've got 464 live viewers. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. That is a great, solid number for a Monday afternoon when, MLB and baseball are all running at the same time. Big thank you from, Matt Holt for hanging out with us. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe here to odds.com. We have everything covered. We've even got Saturday live horse betting shows. If you degenerates want to come out and throw your money around on the ponies, we've got it all covered. So you want to be here at odds.com. We have got the match for the greatest of all time. We've got the heavyweight GOAT title on the line here. The third fight between Stipe Miocic and Daniel DC Cormier. Now, I'm a DC homer, Matt. Let me get that out of the way from the very get-go. This guy's one of my favorite fighters of all time. I think he's the example of what a champion should be. He conducts himself well inside and outside of the cage. He's got all the skills that you could ever look for. He's a finisher. He's got everything that you could ever want. And then you flip on the other side of this thing, and I'll be the first to admit that I have disrespected Stipe in the last couple of years more than I should have. I've done everything I can to poke holes in this guy's record. I've talked about how the guys that he's beaten, they've all been over the hill. They've all been past their primes. And I bet on Daniel Cormier both fights. Now, I felt like I got the right side in both fights because he came in, got it done in the first round in the first one. And then in the second fight, arguably, I felt like he was winning the fight until Stipe flipped it up and did the body shots and ended up taking over later in the fight. So I felt like I kind of got robbed in that second fight. But now that we've had a lot of time to simmer. We've had a time to settle down since that rematch. Leading up to this third one, I've gone back and I've hit the books. I've watched the tape. I've studied the numbers. I've looked at everything. And I don't think I can back DC this weekend. Matt, where are you looking to go on this one?
So I want to see how both guys look. Because in a COVID world, we all acknowledge that, look, the second fight between them happened a while ago. And they both tend to fluctuate in weight and what their bodies look like, especially DC. Mm-hmm. So all accounts this week are that DC's been in really good shape. Everyone that's seen him says he seems pretty light, that he actually has looked really good in the gym. So, okay, that makes a difference because I was kind of wondering what he was going to look like. People don't, everyone doesn't train equally for their retirement fight. So, but he looks pretty good. But I haven't really had a chance to see Stipe yet lately. So I'm interested to see how Stipe looks. Now, his training partners say he looks good, but aren't they always going to say he looks good? You don't see too many training partners saying their guy looks bad.
He looks pretty damn good, Matt.
Yeah. So let's assume that Stipe's in the best shape. I don't bet against Stipe ever. I just don't. Because he's just such a beast in there. Everyone said he was dead against Ngannou. He was the champion, yet an underdog in that fight, and he found a way to win. He lost to Cormier the first time in what was a really competitive first round until DC landed the big right hand. And despite the fact that he was losing in the fight, he found a way to win. Where can I actually hit this guy? Because my reach advantage isn't helping me the way that DC fights. He's slipping a lot of punches. How do I get to him and hurt him? He's so smart. His fight IQ is so good. If you remember the first time he fought JDS, they were both in their prime. Razor thin decision. I actually thought Stipe won it. The judges favored JDS that night, but a razor close fight. They came back out in the rematch, and Stipe blasted him. I mean, he just makes adjustments historically as good as everyone we've seen. And, yeah, some of the guys he fought were old, but Alistair Overeem, that was years ago he fought him. If Alistair Overeem was old then, what is he now, right? I mean, and he just laid waste to some of these guys. And the way he beat him is what impresses me. So Ngannou's out there killing everyone. Let's wrestle his ass off. And Cormier's slipping every punch because it's negating my height and reach advantages. Let me go to the body and rip to the body on this guy because he doesn't like it. And JDS was faster than me with his hand speed. So let me get the power game going straight down the middle instead of being wide, because when I'm wide, I'm too slow against JDS. He's just made the adjustments every time. And I don't know why I would believe he wouldn't make the adjustments here.
I'm right there with you. And the other thing is, I know a lot of people are talking about DC going in and wrestling. We talked about the small cage. We talked about how that favors grapplers. But do people forget that Stipe can wrestle too?
Yes.
I mean, DC is an Olympian caliber wrestler, but he's not gone to his wrestling in a very, very long time.
No.
I think, Black Beast was the last time he went to his wrestling, and that guy's got nothing for takedown defense.
That's right.
So,
you don't even have to take Derek Lewis down. You just tell him you want him to get down, and he lays down on the ground.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Now, I saw on Instagram he did bring in Cain Velasquez, he did bring in Luke Rockhold, he did bring in Corey Anderson, so I believe him that he's training his wrestling. And he did say in the last fight that he gassed out, and that's something that he won't ever make that mistake again, that kind of a thing. But here's the thing. I have a rule that you do not bet fighters that are over the age of 40 unless you've got a damn good reason to do it. Now, to quote Barboza from Pirates of the Caribbean, those are more like guidelines than actual rules. That damn good reason can be anything that you want it to be. You've just got to have a damn good reason to break that rule. And normally speaking, I would break that rule here and bet on DC because, like I said, he's got all the skills in the world. He's a champion. He does everything right. He's got that high fight IQ. But in this case, there's another red flag that I've got to take a look at, and you don't bet on retiring fighters. Whether or not they are coming in with everything they've got in their brain, if they're saying, I'm coming back in for one last fight, it doesn't matter. You've got one foot in the grave. You know that after Saturday, it's over. You're walking away. And that level of motivation, that level of intensity, it's just not like it used to be. You're not the young, hungry kid coming up going for the belt. You're not in that same space before as you were before, simply because you know the retirement is coming.
It reminds me of that, I mean, Marlon Cheeto Vera, they set up Brad Pickett for his retirement fight against the young Ecuadorian named Marlon Cheeto Vera, and Vera absolutely blasted him. Again, to your point, Brad Pickett wasn't hungry that night. He was probably better than Cheeto Vera at that time. He had the crowd. No judge in UK was ever going to go against Brad Pickett over there. It didn't matter. Brad Pickett wasn't hungry anymore. He knew it was over. He was more concerned with leaving his gloves in the octagon than anything else. Now, this is a little different because there's so much on the line to go to the heavyweight title. But I'm with you. I mean, it's one foot in the grave for these guys that say this is the end.
Absolutely. And I can't get past that second red flag. So, bottom line is, I can't bet on DC this weekend. As much as I would love to, the fan in me wants to, I can't do it. So I've got to make an argument for Stipe. And one thing that I'm looking at is, DC said that he's not going to be gassing out. He's doing everything he can to make sure he doesn't gas like he did in the last fight. But if we look at the stats from the last fight, Daniel Cormier hit Stipe with the kitchen sink. I'm a little worried about his power. He threw 181 significant strikes that night. That's his record. He's never thrown that many strikes in a fight in his life, and he still was not able to put Stipe away. Now, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. When Daniel came in and took the heavyweight strap, that was back in 2018. He fought in July 7th, 2018 was when he knocked out Stipe. Stipe fought Francis Ngannou in January of 2018 at the very end of the month. I really feel like he took way more damage in that first Ngannou fight than we all realized and had not fully recovered from it. So now we're getting a durable Stipe. Now we're getting a Stipe that's off of a break. In the rematch, it was a full year later that he fought Daniel Cormier after he got knocked out, and Daniel Cormier couldn't do it again. So same situation here. We've got a full year for the younger man to have recovered, and he took less damage than DC did. You don't get more durable as you get older.
That's right.
You don't get better cardio as you get older. Now Daniel's 41 years old. He took 123 significant strikes from Stipe that night, got KO'd, and his gas tank failed him. I simply can't say that it's going to get any better for him because he's a little more motivated this time.
I agree, and I think as we get closer to fight time, if you like Stipe, it's a wait and see approach, because I know that you have to track these early sharps sometimes, and a lot of the people that bet UFC early are sharp. At least they follow it and they have their opinions, and mine differ from theirs sometimes. But the early sharps like DC, and you got the residual effect off the last card where they did a DC promo. They didn't do a Stipe promo, they did a DC promo. And not only did they do a DC promo during that card, but they talked about how good a shape he's in. They kept showing him bouncing Stipe's face off the mat in the first one. That's going to get some early DC action. I think the longer you wait, the better number you're going to get on Stipe. And by fight night, you could get plus 120, plus 125 in a fight right now, where you're going to get minus 105 or even. So I think it's worth waiting if you're going to bet Stipe, and that's probably what I'm going to do.
I'm right there with you. The reason I haven't pulled the trigger yet is because I think we're going to get a better price. Yeah. And to your point of wanting to see how these guys look, Stipe looks incredible. If you look at his Instagram photos, you can see he's in serious shape, and he is already signed on the dotted line for his next fight. He wants the belt back, he wants to be the champion again, and he wants to keep rolling. You know, with DC, he wants to get the belt back by knockout. He wants to ride off into the sunset as the greatest of all time, the 2-division champion. He's going to be the heavyweight GOAT, call it a career, lay his gloves down in the center of the octagon, and I gotta tell you guys, my only problem is fairy tales don't happen in sports. They're few and far between, and this is a deadly, dangerous sport that we're in. And as much as I love DC, I'm the biggest DC fan. I hate saying this. I just don't see it happening. He got knocked out in his last fight, and I don't see him turning around and doing anything differently enough this fight. He's going to come out and try to wrestle in that small cage, and I know that may work early, but I don't think he's going to be able to keep it up for 25 minutes. No. I don't think he'll be able to put Stipe on his back for a full 25-minute fight at 41 years of age. And when he wears down, when he starts sucking wind, I think Stipe turns it on him. I think Stipe's going to do it in the 4th round again. And y'all know what I like to do in these cases. I like to go ahead and bet my fighter, and then I will sprinkle the rounds 3, 4, and 5 props. Just a little sprinkle on each to go ahead and get that crazy payout. Thankfully, with this being such a big fight, we've actually got those lines out that we can look at. So Cormier by knockout is 2-1. Stipe by knockout is plus 160, which that's another not bad way to go because I don't think either of these guys gets a decision here. And then if we go down to the round props, Stipe in round 3 is plus 850. Stipe in round 4 is plus 1250. And then Stipe in round 5 is 1850. We hit that with Peter Yan, man. We went rounds 3, 4, and 5 with Peter Yan, and he got it done by TKO in the 5th. And I could absolutely see Stipe doing it in the 4th or 5th round again this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think if he invests in that body work early, even if Daniel wrestles him and gets a couple of takedowns and Stipe has to get up in those first rounds, if Stipe keeps investing in that body work, by round 3, 4, and 5, the 40-plus-year-old's going to slow down a bit. And then that's where that reach and power advantage for Stipe come into effect when Daniel slows down a bit and can't keep ducking out of the way of those Stipe shots.
I agree. Couldn't have said it better myself. So, Matt, thank you for breaking down this fight with us. Will you do me a favor and recap the bets that you've already made, and then maybe let us know which ones you're planning on making again so everyone can take some notes?
Sure. So I have, I'm going to probably bet Stipe later in the week, but I have under 1.5 rounds in Rozenstruik and JDS, and I'm probably going to end up betting JDS. I just haven't yet. I'm trying to see what I can get for a price, but I already do have under in that one. I have under 1.5 rounds in Cutelaba, Ankalaev, because I just don't know how they go 7.5 minutes at the pace that they're going to put out. And I have Vink from Hell Pichel at -110 right now over Jim Miller. I just think at the end of the day, I just recently saw them both fight Roosevelt Roberts, and look, Jim Miller's looked okay against some really old guys like Clay Guida, but there's a difference between, Vince Pichel beat the crap out of Roosevelt Roberts, and I think at the end of the day right here, he's just going to be the better fighter. If he can avoid that early submission by Jim Miller, I think he'll cruise the rest of the way.
I like it. I absolutely like it. So for me, I've got a parlay here. I've got Gilbert Burns with Merab Dvalishvili. You're getting +110 on that. I'm risking 2.2 units to win 2. Then I went ahead and throw a third unit on it. I added Sean O'Malley. I'm getting +177 on that one. So if those favorites all come through for me, I think I'm going to be solid gold. I am completely with you. I think I'm probably going to end up on Vince Pichel. I'm trying to talk myself into taking a flyer on my girl, Felice Herrig. And then I'm very much looking at betting Stipe Miocic, although I'm going to be sitting back on that one, waiting to get a little bit better of a line. One more time, thank you so much for joining us this evening, Matt. We really appreciate your time.
Everybody.
The floor is yours. If you want to shout anybody out, if you want to give your Twitter handle, let people know about your business, go ahead. Right now is your time. Have at it.
Yeah, look, thanks for having me on. It was a blast. My Twitter handle's at Matthew Holt USI, and I'm, I run a company called US Integrity. We work with the NBA, Pac-12, Big 12, bookmakers like William Hill, Betfred. I don't work with a lot of direct B2C people, but happy to come on, happy to talk MMA. Thanks a lot, Clint. Really appreciate it. Best of luck, everybody, this weekend.
All right. Thanks again for coming on, Matt. I appreciate it, and we appreciate having you. All right, everybody, that'll do it. That's the UFC 252 breakdown. We went top to finish. I'm sorry that I wasn't as interactive with the chat when I've got a guest. You all know the drill. It's a little bit difficult because I like to be, focused in, giving attention on to our special guests this evening. So I hope you all enjoyed having him on the show. He is absolutely a beast. And don't think I didn't see that Fade Clint in the chat. I'm watching. I see you. As always, positivity, good vibes. If you were on the opposite side from me on a bet, and especially if you cash, I will high-five you. I will fist bump you. That's what it's all about. We don't need the toxicity here anymore. This isn't a pissing contest. We're looking to make some cash. Thank you all for the love and support. Make sure you subscribe here to Odds HQ. Hit that thumbs up for me so that YouTube knows that you like what we're doing over here. Tweet at Matt. Give him a big thank you for coming on the show. Maybe he'll come back and join us again if we give him enough love. And remember, everybody, stay positive out there. Even when things look down, even when things look bad, there's always something to look forward to. We've got sports back. We've got the greatest sport on earth in MMA that we get to cheer for, enjoy with each other, with our friends, and have a good time. Make sure you social distance, but if you can give someone an air 5, if you can send someone a text that you've been thinking of for a while, just make sure they're doing okay. That goes a whole lot longer than you know, because everybody has a battle that they're fighting. You may not know it, you may not understand what they're going through, but a little bit of love and compassion goes a long way these days. So you all stay salty. Everybody have a great week. I will be back Live tomorrow for the odds.com roundtable. Me and my boys, Mo Scream, Nick, we are all going to be breaking down this fight, having some fun. We've also got the Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series happening tomorrow night, so look out for that. Articles left and right coming over on odds.com. Total madness. The post weigh-in breakdown. As always, my boys will be live streaming on Saturday, so be sure to hit the notification button there on YouTube so you know when we go live, because we're freaking always live. Good luck this week on all your action, everybody. Let's roll.